So, welcome everybody. Today in the React Native podcast show, Coffee Talk, we are talking about really cool tool that was released not so long ago with version 1.0. It's called Bun, and it's fresh out of the oven. Sorry, I had to do that. Today with me is my great guest, the man behind all this noise, all this, all this storm on Twitter and over the internet, the creator of Bun, Jared Sumner. Hello, Jared.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining me today. So before we jump into the sweet little details about all this, could you please introduce us to what you've created? Just like because not all of our listeners know what is it all about. We would like to introduce them to the product.
Bun is an incredibly fast JavaScript runtime package manager, task runner, test runner, and kind of the idea is, and also in Bundler, and kind of the idea is by putting a lot of the core workflows we do every day into one tool, we could make a lot of things much simpler and also faster.
And time is money, right? So we want these tools to be faster. So you've been working on it for recent year or so. How long ago did you start?
Probably like 2 years ago. We were in beta in a private beta for about a year. It was a I worked on it without even keeping it open to the public at all for like a year, and then it was private beta for a year. Is that right? No, it was like 6 months between first line of code before anybody could use it. Then it was a year of private beta, and then a year later, now we're here.
All right.
Yeah.
How does it feel like after all this with version 1.0?
It's been really crazy. I basically, I've honestly barely written any code in the last week or so. Mostly, kind of just been a lot of people on Twitter and also triaging, and our Discord's been blowing up. There's like 26,000 people in our Discord. We passed 60,000 stars on GitHub. It's really crazy.
Wow. Exactly. This is why we are here, right? Because this is all crazy. I mean, why do you think Bun is making so much noise right now in the community?
I think that people just want faster tools. And I think that JavaScript has gotten way too complicated over the years. And it's complicated for good reasons, because people are using it for very important things. And that as the number of use cases grow and as the ways people are using it, as it gets more advanced, you just need the tools also we sort of ended up in a place where everything feels kind of duct taped together. And so if you kind of if you sort of build a new tool designed to combine many of the existing workflows into one, you can make a lot of things a lot simpler. And I think it's like speed is both a it's not just about like the runtime performance of any one thing. It's that it helps people ship faster. And that means that like you spend less time reading Hacker News and just like waiting for things. Like the worst part of programming is waiting for things, in my opinion.
Yeah. And then switching the context, coming back to the previous one, right, getting your head into the space where you left it. Yeah, I can feel you. And I see where the problems comes from. But again, some people would say, and this is I think fair opinion on this kind of approach, that they like or love JavaScript for the openness of it, right? So if you're a JavaScript developer, no matter where it's this web or mobile with React Native or whatever, you get the choice of tools on your own, right? You can choose the bundler, you can choose the package manager, etc., etc. And here with Bun, you are basically presented with one all-in-one tool for all your all your matters in JavaScript. Aren't you worried that some people will take this as a maybe, the try to close the ecosystem in one, and
Well,
then
I think
left
there's two
people
parts.
choice. Mm-hmm.
I think there's two parts to that. One is that uh, we uh, we spend most of our time on ecosystem compatibility. Kind of the hardest tools to make work in Bun are actually the build tools, and we spend a lot of time on that. Like we just got Next.js to work days before the 1.0 release, just the pages
Okay.
directory. And that means like Webpack, that means like Chalkadar, the file watcher, that means like uh, there's just so much. That Jest Dash Worker, which is like a IPC, we had to implement like child process IPC to get that to work. Um, uh, all the hard stuff is in the build tools, and so we've actually spent a lot of time to make it so that you can use your existing build tools in Bun. You don't have to use Bun's bundler. You don't have to use Bun's transpiler. You can use the tools that you're already familiar with. You can use yarn and npm as well. You don't have to use a package manager. And our package manager is designed to work a lot like yarn and npm. It has a traditional node modules folder. You can use it with Node.js. It's in fact designed for use with Node.js. So I think, but I think what we want is to present. We do want to present to show that the tools that we use every day can be so much faster. And I think in other language ecosystems, you generally don't have you generally don't have to choose between so many options. And I think like an example is like Ruby on Rails. You can. I'm sure that there are other package managers, but typically people use in the Ruby world, it's called like bundler, and in Ruby gems. And there are a number of other clients for Ruby gems that are super popular. I'm sure somebody's written them and they can, but I think usually a paradox of choice is not actually a good thing. It's good for it to be possible to exist. It's important for that to be true. But I think people usually just want to get their stuff done. They don't want to spend as much time trying to pick which tool to use.
Right. I see, and I agree on that. But there's another concern that comes with this kind of approach. And let's try to address that. So, how do you feel about Bun being so versatile? Like, can there be too much of a good thing? And it's not only about that there are too many parts together bundled in a Bun at the same time. It's more of a maintenance kind of thing, and paying attention to details in each of these elements. So for Bun team, for Oven team, do you feel it's achievable to maintain this high level of detail, of quality for the whole Bun ecosystem?
Yes, I think it's our job to do that. And I think I think one of the kind of superpowers of Bun is that because there's so many different layers we can operate on. When we see a problem in like the runtime, we could solve it at the runtime. We could solve it in the transpiler. We could solve it in the bundler. We could solve it in the package manager. In some cases, we can choose where's the best place to solve this problem. And that means that I think a lot of the reason why things are today, why JavaScript is complicated today, is because every tool that has to solve the problem from the purview of what that tool can do. Like this is sort of a weird example, but like you could argue that this is not something that Bun does, but if like the node module resolution algorithm, for example, I think it would be unlikely if such a thing were to be done today that it would have tricks like the choosing index.js or whatnot, because you have today, those are like things which text editors should clearly solve. But I would bet back in like 2009 or 2008 or whatever it was, that the text editor that people didn't think text editors should be that like powerful or opinionated. And I think it's a similar thing there, where that's kind of my favorite example of solving something at the wrong layer of the stack. That moving the module resolution stuff to be really complicated at runtime when it should just be a text editor IDE kind of thing.
Right. So it's like a design level kind of issue, right? Instead of solving the issue, actually introduce new one
Yeah.
instead, but in a different place now, right? Okay, so how does it work? Like, what makes Bun so fast compared
Um,
to others?
the real answer, like, there's a million tiny things, but the real answer is just that we spent a lot of time profiling. We just try to make it really fast. uh, the like, we just try really hard.
Well,
um, but the more concrete things are like, we spend a lot of time reading about system calls, and so one of the things that is often a bottleneck with IO heavy software is how many system calls and what are the system calls being used and what is the computer actually doing. So, for example, one of the reasons why bun install is really fast is because on Mac OS we use this clone file system call, and it does a zero copy, it does copy and write recursively for directory trees, and so that works really fast when you have like a lot of large files. Like for example, for installing TypeScript, at the time of writing it was like, or at the time of I'm talking, it was like, last I looked, it was like 30 megs or 40 megs or something.
okay.
So we can install TypeScript really fast. And because it's not actually copying the data, it's making another reference to the data using the really fast system call. And a bunch of small things like that. Or like another example would be like, every time you have a system call that goes through JavaScript, you have to clone the path string. You have to add a zero at the end because all of the C APIs expect a zero to be terminating the string. And so we just have a shared buffer that we reuse every time we're cloning. And then even some of the code is like, oh, we only need to clone part of the file path. We're like you copy the directory, and then for all the files in that directory to turn it into an absolute path, we only copy the trailing end part of the path instead of the whole path.
Okay.
So just like, we just spend a lot of time. And so that's like system build. That's like one part of it. The other part of it is like memory allocation, and we also use a lot of SIMD. I never know how to pronounce that, but the idea basically with SIMD is that it is a more and more modern CPUs support a way to operate on data in larger chunks more efficiently. So instead of operating 1 byte at a time, instead of looping over a string 1 character at a time, you can loop over a string 16 characters at a time or 8 characters at a time. And it is almost the same cost as looping over 8 characters or 1 character at a time. So when you're dealing with large amounts of input, you can go a lot faster. So we make heavy use of that in the JavaScript transpiler for things like parsing strings. Like that's for example, it's very useful when you have a JSON parser and you need to parse really large source map strings, and those are like 3 megabytes of source code or something. So we can churn through that really quick. Another example is like, sorry, I could go on and on about this because I spend so much time about it.
For me, it's like super interesting. I'm actually taking notes while you're talking, just for the reference after the talk. So I'm sure that our listeners appreciate this kind of detail. But as you said, there are so many things behind it that maybe we can get back to it after we go through the rest of our questions, so that if we got some time left, we can get back to the performance stuff. And by the way, I've seen obviously I've seen some tweets from you, and I've seen that you even shared like a piece of code where when you showed how you are implementing these performance optimizations in details, like small parts of code where you just changed, I don't remember exactly now, but you changed some kind of data structure to use different one just for that sake of performance boost. So I think that this project being like, because it was originally started just by you, right? No one else on the team.
Yeah. So originally, I was building this like voxel game in the browser, and just the iteration cycle time got really slow.
Okay.
And like the game got kind of big, and that like from like a code size perspective, and just it took many seconds, like 30 seconds or a minute or something, for whenever I refresh the page to see the changes. So I was like, all right, what is making this slow? And then I was like, all right, what if I eventually that led to like, okay, what if I port ES builds transpiler to Zig. I know that's kind of a jump, but and then I did it, and then it turned out that like the JSX translation was something like 3 times faster than ESBuild.
Oh, okay.
And at that point I had barely learned Zig. But I was like, wow, this is amazing. I'm gonna just keep trying this. And then that led to and then I really wanted to get Next.js to work in it. So I was like, all right, I guess we could try adding the JavaScript runtime to this thing. And then, so then I looked at a few different JavaScript runtimes. I looked at using V8. I looked at using QuickJS. I looked a little bit at using Hermes. But then I tried JavaScript core, and it seemed like a very good balance of quick startup time, but with the right kind of performance of with a good JIT and everything. So then, but kind of the hard part about using JavaScript core is it's not easy to embed. It's sort of like V8 puts a lot of effort into okay, we're gonna have great C++ docs. We're gonna have all that stuff. In JavaScript core, it doesn't. JavaScript core is part of WebKit's monorepo. So sort of the way you figure out how to embed JavaScript core is by reading the code. And there's a lot of code. It's many millions of lines of code. So I just spent a month reading a bunch of code. Definitely not all of it. And then just kind of fiddled with it a bunch to get it to embed in Button. And then I wired up the transpiler to the runtime. And then at some point I was also okay, now we're running code, we're transpiling code, but installing is still really slow.
Mm-hmm. So you're discovering another parts that were painful for you, and you just wanted to fix it, basically.
Yeah, and previously, or at my, I just remember also when I was at Stripe, I was really frustrated by how long it took to run yarn install. We were using yarn v1, and it would just take. It was every time anybody merged a PR and you had to pull, it would be 5 minutes of just stuff that you had to do, and then sometimes the post install script would break for whatever reason, and then you had to do it again. And then I think this, and just a lot of Bun was because I started working on Bun mostly because I was just really frustrated with the iteration cycle time of JavaScript, building anything in JavaScript.
Okay, I see. Question. So if you were to start this whole project again, would you say that, the previous experience with building something similar is required to start that? Did you have some kind of experience before you actually took on this task, or you were you know what, let me just fix it. I'm going to jump straight into the JavaScript engine code, going to learn how it works and then rebuild it from scratch?
I would say I gradually tricked myself into increasing the scope this much.
Right.
Yeah, I definitely didn't expect. I was not expecting a JavaScript runtime at all starting out. I was expecting a package manager. I did kind of plan for that. If you look in my repos enough, you'll find a very hacky NPM client written in Go.
All right.
Very hacky. Use LLMDB for the lock file, which is both a good idea and a terrible idea. But that was an interesting. I really like Go. Go is a great language.
Okay, so let me stop you here. Speaking of Go and languages, why Zig? Why did you go for Zig with Bun? And for those of you who don't know, Zig is relatively fresh language. I think 2016 was the release year or something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah, and it's it is something like Go, Rust, this kind of language that you can build systems like this. So why did you go for Zig specifically?
The real reason is I was just really quickly found myself being super productive in it. And that's the biggest thing for me is like we needed to ship a lot of stuff. I tried using Rust for a bit, and personally, I just wasn't very productive. It was pretty hard. And Zig was like, oh, I know how this. There's no a big thing in Zig is that there's no hidden behavior. You know everything that's going on because Zig doesn't have automatic constructors or destructors, and also the memory management is all very manual. So it means that it's very predictable. It means that generally things perform. You can read the code and get a pretty good sense of if something is going to be slow or fast. And this is so part of that also was coming from building that voxel game in the browser, because there's so many things that are in a browser that's kind of hard to control what's going on. And so I was sort of like kind of burned out on that experience to some extent of like,
Right.
if I use Zig, then it's kind of the opposite where I control everything. And of course, that also means that you have to worry about everything. We have to worry about, every memory allocation can fail technically,
Yep.
or like, the integers, we need to make sure that we use wrapping, or we need to be very careful with like integer overflow, for example. And so that's what's nice about Zig is it also has a bunch of debug safety checks. Like if there is an integer overflow or underflow in development, it will panic and it will tell you that it will crash in development. So
Okay.
so you can generally pick up on these things pretty quickly.
All right. So
Yeah.
regarding Zig, aren't you worried a little bit that it's quite fresh and that so much stuff can change in it? Because I'm just checking it right now, and I think that the latest release is 0.11. So it's not even 1.0, right? So aren't you
Yeah.
worried a little bit that, so many breaking changes might come up? You're going to have to basically rework so much of the code base from Bon, or maybe the support for Zig will be dropped at all, because you never know. Aren't you a little worried about this?
Not really. I think that it seems unlikely that Zig syntax is going to change very much. How I expect Zig to change more so is like to improve stability and improve safety. And there are a few features that they haven't implemented yet that they probably will implement. But I think it's unlikely to have like large syntax changes. And even if it did, the worst case is that like we're a large enough code base, we could write some, and Zig syntax is really easy to parse. Like the worst possible case, you just write some one-off migration script, or maybe they even provide that. They've actually been pretty good about that, where like they have a Zig format, which is sort of like prettier, but it also can do some small transforms. So when they made some changes where like they renamed some built-in function to something else, then all you do need to do is sometimes is just run Zig format on all your code, and then it does the change.
All right. Pretty cool. So does Zig have something like Bon, but for Zig, like all in one tool?
Well, Zig has is starting to get a package manager, and they have obviously a compiler. They also you can also compile C using Zig's wrapper, and they also have a C backend as well, and a WebAssembly backend, so you can compile Zig to WebAssembly.
All right.
It does a lot of
Okay.
stuff.
Yeah, this is very interesting. So this is a little bit of extra sauce for those low levels enthusiasts out here listening to us. All right. So as I said, Bon is constructed of bits and pieces of different responsibilities. So let's call them features, right? Like package manager, bundling, and stuff like that. So which one of these features do you think, or do you know, is most popular right now? Do you have like some kind of statistics saying what people are
We are
using?
good. We don't really have, one thing is we really don't have good tracking at all. We don't have any instrumentation like properly right now. We will add instrumentation as well as a way to disable the instrumentation. We actually used to have it, but then we just stopped maintaining it, and then we kind of just turned it off. But we're going to bring it back at some point kind of soon. But my sense is, just from feedback, I would say Bun install is probably the most popular part of Bun. And that's because it's the easiest one to adopt. It's a little scary to switch your JavaScript runtime, but package manager is like a lot easier. it's also a very, very immediate benefit. Like you can just feel how much faster it is. You don't even need to like, it's a very low effort to try it. Uh,
Okay.
but button test, I think, is going to also be really popular. There's a couple things we're missing. We're still missing extends, and we're still missing inline snapshots and module. But I think once we have those three things, it's going to be a really. I think it's a pretty surprising how much faster your tests can get. People usually assume that that the bottleneck for their tests is their code, and that is sometimes true, but it's not always true.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. That makes sense. Okay. So speaking of package managers and that people really like it in Bun right now, why would you say other package managers are so slow compared to Bun? Apart from all these, little performance boosts that you mentioned and the approach regarding how we can leverage up the system we're using, the operating system. Do you think there are other, bottlenecks in other package managers that might be responsible for this kind of slow benchmarks?
I think it's a few things. I think one is uh, um, I think one thing is the lock file format is part of it. Is that usually if you have a large enough project, the npm client has to spend a lot of time parsing the lock file and then parsing all the package JSONs. And we do parse all the package JSONs, but we try to do but the lock file one has a binary lock file, and we put a lot of effort into making it really fast to serialize and deserialize. Um, so kind of the general structure there is that, like, when you want to make serialization fast, you put the variable length data at the end, and you put and you try to make it so you have the least number of like arrays of arrays, essentially. So we have a lot of optimizations in the serialization there to make it load really big lock files really fast. And we also put a lot more data in the lock file. We can essentially, if we wanted to, we could run packages without any of the package JSONs. The problem, you can't actually do that because you don't want it to be stale. You need to make sure that like the changes are in sync and everything is correct, up to date. But there's enough, but all the data is in there. So that's like one of the optimizations. Another one is that just like the system calls we use are really a big part of it is the system calls, like copy file, clone file, symlink, hard link, all that stuff. But when it all supports explicitly choosing a backend to use, so you can be like, oh, I want to use hard links, or oh, I want to copy file. You can do -- backend equal hard link. This is kind of a weird feature, but like it's just gives people a little bit more control. Another thing is that we don't run post installs for dependencies. Most of our benchmarks are also we're careful about that because we want to make sure that basically with a lot of the post installs people are running are just unnecessary. A lot of the time they just like print a message. I think core.js is one of those where it just prints a message, and that post install takes 60 ms or something like that, and it's just you don't need it. And I think there are cases where you do need it. You do need it, for example, for Sharp or for like bcrypt or Argon 2. We're going to have but there's there's also this security trade-off because you're allowing arbitrary packages to run these post-install scripts on your computer, and you're just trusting that they're not going to do something malicious. And that's been a really big attack vector for various npm packages, that they like install a Bitcoin miner or something, or some like keylogger in a post-install script. So by not running it, it's more secure. But it has this trade-off of some packages don't work. So what we're going to do is we're going to have let you have a key in your package JSON that says allow these packages to run their post-install scripts. And there will be a default list that are allowed to run them, which is going to be like from the top 10,000 most popular packages, and kind of a curated list from that. And that way people don't typically run into this problem anymore of, oh, I can't use it because I'm using bcrypt or one of these packages, which absolutely do need a post install. But even
Right.
then, we can still make those post install scripts faster because usually they're using something like CMake. And there are various caching things you can do with CMake to make CMake repetitive installations that are repetitive CMake runs to be faster. Um, uh,
Right.
so there's a lot of there's a lot of stuff we do there.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So you mentioned that there will be a list of like the curated list of these
Yeah,
trusted packages, we can say. Um, who's gonna be curating it? Is it gonna be you? Are you gonna have a team on that, or is it gonna be like a community thing to do?
it's going to be a community thing. It'll be just like a text file that's like included in Bun, and then other people can like submit PRs and stuff to add to the list, or remove from the list. Um,
Right. All right. All right. Okay. So basically, like the biggest, maybe not a beef, but something people are really comparing Bun to is obviously Node right now. Um, so how did Node influence how Buns is built right now? I mean, probably
I
you've
mean,
learned from their mistakes, right? And you could apply those changes to your thing, to your product. But anything else?
Bun would never exist without Node. Like we owe Node a lot, and I think like uh, yeah, like uh, we Bun we aim to be a drop-in replacement for Node.js, um, and what that means is that we implement the vast majority of Node.js core modules. I think the number is 40, maybe it's 35, somewhere in that range. I don't remember the exact number. But I think the biggest ones that we're missing right now are DGRAM and HTTP2. I'm expecting HTTP2 is going to be done in like a week or two. Um,
Right.
and then, but yeah, I mean, we definitely, the thing is we do implement a lot of them very differently than Node. Like, for example, we use a lot of native code. So, like, for example, fetch, which is also a built-in in Node and in more recent versions of Bun. Or sorry, it has always been a built-in in Bun, but it is also a built-in in recent versions of Node. That our implementation is all in native code. The HTTP client itself runs on a separate thread, so that way you don't have to. So that way, like the work of compressing and decompressing and all the other stuff that goes into an HTTP client doesn't happen on the main thread, and potentially block your JavaScript. It also means it increases complexity in a lot of cases, and an unfortunate side effect is it also means that Bun can be harder to contribute to because generally we don't actually use that much JavaScript, despite being a JavaScript runtime.
All right. Mostly Zig anyway. Are you very strict on pull requests? Like, do you go through pull requests by yourself? Or
Oh
do you?
yeah, I go through most of the pull requests, but we still have other people on the team do too. But I probably end up reviewing a lot of them right now. And there's a few foot guns that we need to address there. Like some of our build scripts, we don't run them in CI because we don't want our CI to need to depend on Bun. So that because I think it's sort of we want to avoid a chicken and egg situation where like you need Bun in order to build Bun.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense.
But it also means that you have to run some build scripts on your computer, and that gets kind of weird. You have to commit these files, and then these files have merge conflicts with something we need to fix.
All right. So every time you want to test the new PR, you actually have to do it locally. There's no way to test it out on the CI properly.
Well, we do test it on CI. We do have all our tests run on CI because it would be impossible. There's because we have to test on like macOS ARM64, macOS x64, Linux x64, Linux, and then we also have to have a test for like a simmed version of Bun and a non-simmed version of Bun because not every computer supports simmed instructions. And there have been various bugs in the past where there was something that worked on the simmed version of Bun, but on the not in the baseline version, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I actually completely, for some reason, I didn't think that Bun has to be supported by so many platforms. So testing is very vast, right? You
Yeah,
have to have many different environments to test
and
it out. I
we have like
completely erased that from my mind.
we also have a Windows build, but and so that Windows will be added to the CI soon. And like that's a whole thing too, because very little of the Windows build works. Like parts of it do, just the runtime. But like you can do console log hello world,
Right.
but you can't do like bun install.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we'll
Yeah.
fix it.
Actually, this is a good point. I was going to ask you about that. So, what's up with Windows? Like, why is it not working yet properly? What's the deal here?
Well, a lot of bun it's really a couple things, but the main thing is that uh, we spend a lot of time optimizing bun for Linux and for POSIX systems, and Windows is a whole other world. Instead of UTF-8 file paths, you use UTF-16 file paths. Instead of forward slashes, you use backslashes. It actually turns out that like the API support both directions, which is kind of interesting. But another thing is that like the all of the system calls are different, and in a lot of cases we actually directly use the system call interface on Linux. So we kind of want to try to go pretty low level to get as much out of get as much performance out of the machine as we can.
Mm-hmm. So, is it like I don't want it to sound like bad, but so this is not a bad thing. But is it like due to lack of expertise in Windows ecosystem or lack of time to manage all these different parts that are different from Linux?
It's
What?
mostly, I would say that the biggest reason, honestly, is that like we're Bun as a company, we're and we raised about we raised $7 million last summer, and I personally have spent too much time coding and not enough on hiring more engineers,
All right.
and growing the team, and so because this is it basically like we should have hired more engineers by now, but I've been writing too much code, and if we
Right.
had hired more engineers, then we would have people who are working on Windows, who are not just me. Our team is 7 people full time, but we should be more than that.
Right. Right. I mean, so that basically kind of points out both of the points that I did mention. So a little bit of lack of expertise probably because you're mostly focused on Linux and stuff like that, but also lack of time, like physically lack of time to do
Yeah,
that, right? So yeah, that makes sense. And since you are mentioning, the team of 7 developers working full time, there was a bit of also disruption on Twitter some time ago when you started hiring or you were already in the process of hiring, that you mentioned on a tweet that if you want to join the oven team, you have to be ready to crunch it, right? We are building something great. You need to dedicate yourself to this. So work-life balance is kind of off, and that caused a little bit of noise as well, a little bit of controversy. So how did that work after all? Like the whole crunching thing. Did you actually commit this much as you expected everyone else to commit, and did other team members commit to the crunching style of working?
that wasn't exactly how it was phrased, but I think the I think it was important to be just upfront with people that like Bun is going to look. We have a lot of Bun is not an easy thing to build, and that we have a lot of work to do, and that it's going to take hard work, and that uh, it's not going to be easy. And I wanted to just be totally upfront with anybody that that is the only way it would ship, pretty much. But I would also say it wasn't. I would also say it sounded like more intense than it actually turned out to be. Like I work really hard, but I don't expect generally I think the founder of the company should always be the hardest working person at the company.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. From my perspective, I really appreciate this kind of, you know, information flow and honesty from you because, if you think about it, if you want to create anything that is good and that is actually changing something in the world we know, you have to crunch it, right? Otherwise, people would just build mediocre products and everything would be mediocre. And this way you actually commit yourself to this. And the truth is, many founders and many people from tech industry, I think not specifically in tech, but this is what we know, are working hard, many hours a day, many hours a week, way more than average people, just to deliver the stuff that they believe in. And it comes with passion, right? Like if you're passionate about something, you just lose the sense of time when you're working on it very often, right? I was surprised that there was such a storm around this whole crunching Twitter and stuff like that. But I do appreciate that you mentioned that.
Yeah, I
And the
also it
next
was
week.
also like for me it was also like I started getting like death threats.
Oh,
It got
really?
really intense. Yeah, that was a little that was the I both didn't expect that intensity, but also that anybody would that was like why I deleted the tweet, because it's not like that is a line, uh, and then I do not want.
Yeah, but this is crazy. For like, you mean threats for that you are announcing that you're hiring people, but they have to be ready to work hard.
Yeah.
What the hell, people? I mean, come on. What's the deal here? If you don't want to work hard, just don't apply. I mean, you don't have to threat people who are doing this. Jeez. Okay. Well, I hope this is over now. I hope you
Oh
don't
yeah,
have to deal
it's
with
well
this more.
over. It was very much for that. Just that was like the peak of the craziness.
Wow. Okay, I would not expect this. So I'm glad actually nothing happened. I'm really happy
Yeah.
you did deliver and that it all ended up well. Um, all right, Jared. Um, so we are here in the React Native Show podcast. So, and I know you got a little bit of background in React Native, right? Can you share with us what was your background with React Native?
Yeah, I previously built a handful of apps in React Native a few years before Bum. One was like an alarm clock app. One was uh, it was like a meme app, uh, and that the meme app was like really fancy. We had like a contact picker, a really fast React Native contact picker API. Um,
For memes.
well, well, for like a share screen.
All right.
Yeah,
All right.
I probably I over engineered it. I definitely over engineered it.
That's what we like to do as engineers, right?
Yes, I spent a bunch of time worrying about also like how do you. Yeah, I also like the way you like, because you could like the idea with the app was that you could like mix and match multiple videos and photos in one, and then it would like generate a GIF.
Yeah.
Uh, and like I spent a bunch of time on like the text rendering stuff there, like figuring out how to style it, because there's only the options in React Native that come with like the built-in text component are pretty limited.
Right.
So I had to like read a bunch of stuff about how what is it called? Oh, it's been a few years. Yoga, about how yoga works, and I had to like write some. And at the time, I had never written any C++, so I was like, "What is this?"
Okay.
Um,
Right. I
uh,
see.
yeah, but it
Okay.
was pretty. I went like pretty deep on that for a little bit. I learned a lot.
Okay. I have to ask a question because since you've said that, I couldn't focus on anything you said. You're in a GIF team, not GIF.
I,
Since we are talking about the meme app, I have to ask that.
I don't have a strong opinion on this, whether it's GIF or GIF. I always just say GIF.
All right. I think because I think people would be starving to ask that. Okay. So all right. So a little bit about React Native. And I know that you've seen. I think that was a week ago. That our folk from Callstack, Tomek Misiukiewicz, did create a pull request to React Native to introduce Bun as a package manager, and it got merged. So good stuff. Um, yeah. So do you see any specific future? Maybe do you have some ideas about how Bun can interact with React Native, or maybe it can influence it somehow?
I think there's like two really cool directions. The baseline really cool direction is like, is there a world where you could have something like Buns Bundler instead of in place of Metro? Um, I think it's like very plausible. Like specifically, like I think the main bottleneck really is when targeting Hermes as a runtime. Hermes doesn't implement all of the ES6 last I checked. They might have by now. I haven't looked in a little while. But I think like async and await, or maybe it was async iterators. But there's a few things like that which people expect, and Bun currently doesn't support transpiling down to ES6. Could be added in the future. It's not terribly hard. We can something where we can use ESBuild as a point of reference, because ESBuild does do that. But it's still something that we haven't done. But I think it would be very plausible to do that in the future. I think what's more interesting is the question of can you run instead of using JSC, could you run a build of Bun on the device directly? I think, and this is all very speculative. To be clear, you cannot do this right now. It doesn't work. You would need to figure out how to build it. But the potential there is interesting. And it's interesting because then you could have the TypeScript built directly on the device. You could just ship sort of like a web browser. You could just consume the code in the same, or like the ideal of a web browser, really, where you could just consume code in the same source, the way you get it from the source.
So you wouldn't have to transpile it down to JavaScript. It would be just TypeScript fed it directly into browser in this case.
Yeah. And so then you wouldn't need to, and then Bun has built-in hot reloading. So in development, you would just run Bun with --hot in your iPhone app. I don't exactly know how that would, you would need a way to pass flags. Obviously, there would need to be some kind of API, etc. But, and you would get the full runtime. So it wouldn't just be, it wouldn't be like, because right now you sort of get a limited set of web APIs that are kind of seemingly arbitrary to some extent. Like last I checked, in order, it's been a few years since I really used React Native, but like for example, like fetch, you had to use like React Native fetch blob, if I remember correctly. Or it was a package like that, and then whereas instead you could just, if you could use Bun, then you would just use the fetch global, and you would have all of the web APIs that Bun implements.
Right.
And you could use like import and require in the same file. You could use like start an HTTP server inside your React Native app. I don't know exactly why you would want to do that, but you could.
Or not.
Yeah.
All right.
And I think there's some path there too, where you have like, because the JSI has an existing adapter for JSC, it should be totally possible to just use their existing JavaScript core C API with Bun. And then on top of that, there are various things we can do to make JSI faster in theory. Again, this is all speculative. None of this is implemented. But I think there's a ton of interesting possibility there in the future.
Yeah, that sounds really exciting, actually. Like from the React Native developer point of view, like I would love to give it a go already. So do you already have some kind of plans that you want to do it, and you feel like, okay, maybe next year we're gonna try to do it, or do you have nothing for now, and this is just like, oh, that would be nice, and this
is all speculative. I have nothing right now, to be clear.
Okay.
However, the way I think about this is that like I wonder if we can all focus on this, anything like this right now. There are 1,600 issues, more than 1,600 issues, or something like a number like that in our repo right now, and that number needs to go down. That's like embarrassing.
I mean, it's not embarrassing, looking at that. It's just 2 years of development, mostly by yourself. I mean, come on, man. Just give yourself a little bit of space, and agree that you're probably a human being, right? I didn't give you a captcha to solve it, but
we're a team of 7 full-time people. We like, there are other people contributing and working on really important stuff. It's not just me. But I think basically maybe this is something that we would explore in like a year from now.
Yeah.
Like once we've had time for like Windows to be good, and once we've had time to like make the issue count go down, once we've had some more work on like hosting and projects like that, that I think it would be interesting to have some kind of, or maybe somebody from the community will be interested in and seeing where that goes. And if there is somebody from the community who's interested in, it's going to not, and to be clear, it's not going to be something that's easy to do.
Right.
There's going to be a bunch of stuff that needs to be tweaked, especially figuring out how to get Bun past App Store review is going to be a challenge, because we do use a lot of system call, like low-level APIs that are typically not accessible to iPhone apps. So we're going to need to figure out which ones need to not be used, and then have some iPhone specific workaround.
And question is how that will affect like the performance and stuff like that, right? Because that would be a significant change.
Most of the places these things are used are in things like bun install, where you have arbitrary file system access, and it's probably a little bit less important to React Native use case.
Okay.
There's still an interesting thing there too with like on Android you could have a JIT. I'm pretty sure. I'm not 100% sure how that works. I think there's some rule there for like it's like more relaxed than iOS, but I'm not 100% sure. And there'll also be some binary size concerns too, because on iOS you can just use the dynamically linked version of JavaScript core. You don't have to have a copy of JavaScript core. I think that would add like 20 megs or something to maybe it'd be less than that, but it'd be something like that, which is huge. So that's something to be worked
to the final bundle.
Yeah,
Okay.
because of linking JavaScript core. So that would be a problem. Maybe there's ways to make it smaller. I'm not sure.
Well, it's the shout out to the community. If anyone's there, hyped enough to jump on this and try to help Jared and his team building stuff for the React Native future, go and do that, right? I'm not familiar with Zig at all. I would love to give it a try, but this is not my piece of cake. This is not a piece of cake at all. So Jared, let's just try to sum up the React Native part. So what would be the biggest, like just a very brief one, what would be the biggest benefits for React Native of introducing Bun to it, if you could point that out?
In the short, if it's the first thing, which is like today it'd be Bun install and Bun run, faster to install packages, faster to run your scripts. A little bit longer term, maybe there's some potential for bundler to work there, and that means faster bundling, faster builds. It also means you could do some macros. So Bun has this interesting feature in the bundler where you can have compile time evaluation of code if you add import type macro or with type macro at the end using the import assertions, or not import assertions, import attributes, the stage 3 proposal. And then the result of that is inlined into the build. So if you want to move some expensive code to happen at build time, you can just do that directly.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for this brief summarization. And now, we've been already an hour in this discussion. So I think this is a good time to try to give few answers to some questions from Twitter. So we recently asked on Twitter if you got any questions to Jared, and we got a few questions. So let me start with this one. It's from Jamin from Infrared. Shout out to you, Jamin. So the Jamin is a little bit curious about how the core team seems to make very quick decisions on API, specifically bun dot the command, right? So he thinks that these quick decisions may come back in the future and bite you later, right? It's a blessing and a curse because you make quick decisions, but you need to think about the future as well. So he's curious, what are your thoughts on the risks of potentially getting a bun dot API wrong and need to introduce the breaking changes in the future?
This was one of the things just before 1.0. We removed a handful of. We did make a few mistakes there, and that was we used 1.0 as kind of also a place to do breaking changes. So we removed there was a function bun.read file as string, which is just like, why did we have that? Because there's already you can already do bun.file.text. It's a much cleaner API. It gives you array buffer. You can do JSON, etc. And there were a few other ones like that. Like there was like for this really obscure thing Bun used to support and we stopped supporting is like bun.get imported style sheets was another function, which is like you could append, you could get a list of all the style sheets imported since the last time you called bun.get imported style sheets, which is like useful for like kind of server-side rendering, embedding CSS, figuring out what style sheets need to be bundled together potentially, but it's like that's like the wrong abstraction for that. So that was another one we got rid of.
So you did basically the review of the whole API before 1.0?
Yeah. The ones that are sort of weird that we left in are bun.unsafe. So you can use bun.unsafe to, there's a couple functions on there. One is dot pointer, which lets you read, I think that was, array buffer toString, where bun.unsafe.array buffer toString lets you, there's a string to array buffer. I think it's array buffer toString. And the idea is it's sort of like you cast an array buffer to a string. And so without doing any encoding or decoding, so you could have potentially invalid data. The string could potentially, if the array buffer is freed, then it could crash. So this is why it's on bun.unsafe, because it is unsafe.
It says what it does, right?
Yeah. But it's also potentially really useful in very specific cases where you know that it is already a correctly encoded string and there's overhead with converting and with decoding and encoding strings, and you know that you can just skip it.
Right.
So it's sort of giving people power tools that they have to just be very careful with.
Okay, so did you and your team change the approach of introducing new API stuff after you release 1.0, or is it the same as before? Nothing has changed, and you're confident about this approach?
We are pretty careful with what we do add, even though it doesn't seem like it. Like one of the ones we haven't done yet, we've actually been pretty conservative on introducing new APIs because we spend most of our time on Node.js compatibility. Like we still don't have a way to read directories without using Node's FS library. When we have a whole like spec planned out there for what that's going to look like, but we can't prioritize it right now because we have to fix so many bugs first.
Right.
So yeah, I would say we actually don't have. It's not that arbitrary. It was definitely arbitrary, like the first, before we released Spun publicly at all, and it was like just me in this room. We did a review before the 1.0.
Okay. All right. Nick Ravenko is curious a little bit more about macros and FFI business. He says that it's definitely worth using, but when will it be safe / production ready, if not already to use? And what are your and the rest of your team's plans for this feature and further support and development?
For macros or FFI, because those are both pretty different things.
You know what? Let's talk about macros.
Okay. I think I have mixed feelings about macros. I think we should have done. I think it's really only useful right now for like inlining certain data. But what we should have, like, macro is almost a misnomer. It should have probably been called like comp time or const eval or something like that, because that's closer to what it actually is.
Right.
But I still think we should do some kind of macro thing. I would love for us to do, and again, we don't have any plans to do this right now, to be clear, because again, we need to fix bugs. That's our priority. I would love to do something that's more like, could you like pass it some code to include in the result, and then like it like programmatically like generate a for loop that inlines all the results or something, like in that it gets like transpiled and everything. Something like that. I would love for us to do something more. So like less. Like right now, it's very limited. You can only get data and return data. There are things that are fancy about it. You can use like return response body, and it will actually detect that it's like the response body outputted JSON, and then it becomes just JavaScript objects. And then you could do like destructuring to do dead code elimination on that. So if you're only using the like API object or like the name or avatar property on the JSON return from a macro, then the transpiler will detect that and then not include the rest of the output.
Cool. Okay.
As long as minification is enabled. Um,
Okay.
and then regarding FFI,
All right.
the interesting direction I think with FFI, which we haven't done enough of yet, but I'd love to explore it more in the future, is like JavaScript. It should be easier. You should be able to import arbitrary files from other programming languages, and you can hack this together right now. There was a community member did this, but we should make it a little bit easier. We don't right now. Right now you have to use some combination of loaders and like spawning a process and a few other things in FFI. And then the end result is you can like import a REST file from TypeScript. But this needs to be this in its current form, and it's like still pretty hard. We should make it easier.
Mm-hmm. All right. All right. So last question, but this one is from me, and I'm just really curious about it. So you mentioned that Bun received a like 7 mil investment last summer, I suppose. So that raises a question: what are the plans for Bun to start profiting? What are you planning to do in terms of start making money with Bun?
We're going to do integrated hosting into the runtime. So from Bun CLI, there will be a subcommand for deploying directly to production, and it's going to support both existing frameworks, and it's also going to support just like plain like Node.js style things, and also Bun scripts and everything else. Kind of the idea there is we're going to make it really simple to deploy pretty much anything, and it's going to start really fast.
Right. Are you planning on building your own platform, or do you want to partnership with like, I don't know, maybe Vercel? I know that Vercel recently did take Bun into their services, right?
I think like I think Vercel is great, and we love them. I think that most likely, like the plan there really is that we're going to offer hosting on ourselves, and we're going to and that means like building out a lot of infrastructure and monitoring and things like that.
Yeah.
That's part of it.
Okay, and that's the plan for when? When do you plan to release such a platform?
We don't have a date to share right now, but because really, again, right now our focus is just on we have 1,600 bugs that we need to fix, or 1,600 issues.
Right.
But I would be surprised if it shipped later than say a year from now. I would be very surprised. I would be less surprised if it was 6 months, but so somewhere in that range is pretty likely.
All right. So the community has something to look forward to. Awesome. All right, Jared. Thank you very much for that. And that was a really, really interesting discussion. I wish we could have like, I don't know, maybe one day more to do this because I feel like we could be talking about it for the whole day at least. So yeah, big thank you again for showing up. I would like to encourage everyone listening to this podcast or watching us on YouTube to give it a go, to go there, download Bun, try to, integrate it into your project if possible, and drop some comments, tag Jared on Twitter, let him know what's wrong, let him know what to be fixed. He will probably appreciate that.
I would love that.
Yeah, exactly. And me personally, now I'm very hyped to try out Zig and maybe try to contribute to this. Hopefully that will be possible in some time.
That'd be great.
All right. Thank you very much. And yeah, have a great day and take care.
Thanks.